Do you like what you hear? Then you need a Devon bass. Devon bass. Better by design. Whether you're old school or whether you're new school, we discuss it all for the only one that matters. Christian Talk with Christian musicians. Greetings and salutations in the name of our Lord. Welcome to another episode of For the Only One That Matters, where we Christians talk amongst ourselves. And the focus of these podcasts will be on Christian musicians and what's going on in their lives. Sometimes it'll have a lot to do with the physical aspects of being a Christian musician in this world. Sometimes it will have a concentration on being a Christian in today's world. And today's episode is an example of that. It's a friend of mine, a fellow alum from Vermont's College of Fine Arts, where we attended together, and he and I were pursuing our master's degree in composition, our MFAs. He is currently teaching film scoring at Liberty University. He has worked on feature films in the past. He's a film scorer. And I wanted initially to get into that aspect of what he does because I think it's fascinating. But then I discovered a book that he wrote, Journey from Heartache to Hope. And most of our conversation today will be focusing on that. We'll come back to him later and talk about being a musician. But this is a story of being a Christian through some of life's most horrendous difficulties. And so without any further ado, let's join our interview in progress. This will be with Chris and his wife, Mary Alice.
Wow, look at this. So what a wonderful welcome with the book cover. So wow, this is awesome.
Well, I love the book, and I knew some of your story because we were roomies at VCFA, and dear lady, I think your husband accused me of snoring.
Oh, you're the one. I remember. No, I think there's something on social media you had commented, right?
I think it's a falsehood because it never woke me up.
Right.
I thought I'm never going to go to that moment where we were roommates and beyond of that when else has happened. But that is going to go for the eternity, you know.
Well, to be honest, my wife and I sleep in different rooms in the house now because she got tired. She said, you were either going to stop snoring or I was going to stop your snoring. So we just,
and, we're recording this, right?
Yes, it will be recorded. And now this is, but this isn't live. So right. I have the ability to edit.
Gotcha. I know. Who's the censorship? VCFA?
Nope. I'm not going to censor anything from those folks.
Okay. Gotcha.
Hey, just real quickly on that subject, what do you think about what's going on with VCFA, with them moving out to Colorado and stuff?
I wish I could comment, but I can't.
I'm not affiliated with anybody. I'm curious. Business is business is business. I get that, and I think it's sad that we're gonna lose that lovely little place in Vermont, but.
I loved it. I mean, it's very, it's like now I live in Virginia with my wonderful Mary Alice, my wife. So, I mean, that's, it's, I get to that corner of, Vermont and all the fun of Montpelier and all the architectonic, structures in there, plus what they did modern. I think that was kind of nice, incorporating the modern into the old fashioned kind of way. Yep. Still kind of stylistically, so it takes a lot of insight and planning, and I got that. So it's beautiful. Campus was small but historic.
I loved it because I never I went to the Armed Forces School of Music. That was the only formal music education I had. But they're like a small miniature Berkeley in the fact that they turn out good players, and that's the point, because you're going to go out in the fleet and play in the Army, Navy, or Marine Corps bands. And so they shove about 2.5 years of music into you in 6 months. I was a bass guitar major and a tuba minor, and I had to put 20 hours a week practicing on tuba, 30 hours a week practicing on bass, on top of 8 hours a day music classes.
Gotcha.
And so I was pretty fair player when I left, but I always wanted the college thing. Gotcha. And so the master's thing, VCFA, in some ways, a lot of my friends have told me it was a waste of my money because I'm not going to have a career as a composer. Right. But it was a bucket list thing. I got tired of being the guy that got laughed at for being a music theory nerd, no matter where I was at, what church I was at, or anything like that.
Why would you be that left out? What was the reason?
Well, I have an insatiable desire to learn about music. Every waking moment is something about music. And I love music theory. I love uncovering the mysteries of music composition. I remember my first meeting with Roger. He said, all right, what kind of music do you want to compose? I said, 16th century choral works.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that. Yeah. Something like microtonal with some, layer of different choirs, whatever that was.
I started studying the Mass. All right. Okay. And as a Protestant who had never had any exposure to that faith tradition, the Catholic, Episcopal, Lutheran, I was stunned by the glory of it. I was quite unprepared for how I would feel about it when I started reading the Kyrie. And I went to the Atlanta Symphony one year, and they were doing Mozart's Requiem, D minor, and they had the English translation up on a giant screen. And there was a part in it where he obeyed the format of the the Kyrie, the Gloria, all that kind of stuff. But then he inserted a piece of his own, and in it breaks your heart, because he's saying, Lord, you promised salvation. You promised me deliverance from the fires of hell. Here I am. And this is a guy on his deathbed that's writing that kind of stuff. And I remember just leaving the symphony hall weeping, because until that point, I'd always kind of made fun of Mozart because he was such a hedonist. He drank and he womanized and he made crude jokes but underneath all that stuff was a man who was crying out to God. And I'd never realized that before until I listened to his Requiem in D minor. And now I'm truly, truly hoping I see him on the other side of glory, because wow. So I was sucked into that. And I want to do 15th century, the stuff where it all began, medieval type stuff. And Roger looked at me just real quiet for like about 15 seconds. He said, Paige, nobody's writing that stuff anymore. Right. I said, I know, ain't it great?
In the world, I think in the world of composition today, and more so, you have a freedom to express yourself the way you feel and what's in your heart.
Yes.
Right? If this is what's on your heart, God gave you the talent, and you want to be expressive. It doesn't matter how many degrees or whatever the school is. If you feel the theory needs to be done your way, and that's the beauty of film music, because it just breaks the barrier for me, that even if I teach composition classes, I tell the students, I just first say, learn the music theory and, get the best grades and forget about it. And they just start worrying about what is he saying? Well, it's like a simple scale. You just learn how to use it. Now use it. So forget about that the different application that you still learn ABC. Now you're going to use that. And
somebody told me once, it said, do you know what they call the guy who graduated last in his medical school? I said, what? He said, doctor. And that was what Roger came to me. He says, look, he said, wrestle with it, make something out of it. Don't worry about how it stacks up or compares to anybody else. He says, this is you making music. And I think I've written like 14 or 15 Kyries since then. And the 1 year that you and I were together, I think they performed a Kyrie of mine, and the mezzo soprano. Oh, I wish I could remember her name. She was glorious, Jewish lady. When I went into my first rehearsal with her, she said, "Paige, I have to confess something. We saw your Kyrie in the stack. We went, oh, whoopee, another Kyrie." And I didn't know that everybody writes Kyries. I'm a Protestant. What do I know about this stuff? It was my first Kyrie. But she said something really interesting. She says, but we saw yours and we realized this is not a normal Kyrie. She said, so did you have a religious experience when you were writing this? And I said, yeah, funny you should mention. I had like a 3 or 4 hour period in one day where I had to concentrate on this. And I had to get up after 2 hours and walk away because, the Kyrie has 2 phrases, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. And so I said, I'm writing this and it's forcing me to think about the mercy of God. And I began to realize I need God's mercy for every breath that I take.
Right.
I need his mercy to get up in the morning and to go to sleep at night and make it through the night and wake up the next morning. I need his mercy everywhere. I said, and it became so overwhelming. I had to get up and walk away because all of a sudden I realized that my salvation is based solely upon the mercy of God.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And without that, I'm dead.
Right.
And that's the way my Kyrie started out. It started off with just this really plaintive cry, mercy. And then there's this gap. And then you have the alto and the mezzo and the soprano come in seconds, clashing with each other. Mercy. Right. And that whole thing is just the give and take from and I said, to me, the Kyrie is the cry of the penitent who needs God's mercy. And I said, it's no wonder that's what every church service would start out with. We need God's mercy. And then once mercy is granted, on the heels of that comes Gloria.
Right.
Now, this is a Protestant. This is a Protestant thinking its way through.
Having different music today, right? So many churches don't have that. So we both like the traditional hymnals where it's vocal singing in the church. We kind of go to that. When just the whole congregation sing a cappella. Not to say that instrumentals, is by no means in displacement of that. It's just if it's used in a proper way, everything is if it glorifies God, then let's use all the different instruments. But in the sense, it's so many diversity, and so now it's everybody separates. Then there's the older people who like the organ, and that's the low tempo, and there's no happy clappy dancing. And some church I don't want to have that name. They still clap on one, and so that's still very hard. But they know that's how they do, because it's straightforward into specific area in time. And so that's hard to hear nowadays, that everybody does Kyrie somewhere in the church, unless a specific occasion, right? So some Baptist church do a lot of orchestral stuff, and they can have from time to time some influence of, depending how big the church is, because of the orchestra. So but
that it's gotten to the point, and my wife asked me this once, and I married the perfect woman for me, because I'm pretty sure she's the only one who could deal with me. But yet she always asks the questions that goes right to the heart of the matter.
Right.
When I was getting ready to go to VCFA, she said, why at 55 years old, or 56, I think. No, I was 58, because I was 60 when I graduated. She said, why at 58 years old do you all of a sudden have this need to go get this degree in music composition? And I told her that I feel like I'm always alone in the room with my love for music. You'd asked me earlier why I felt that way. It was like the music. I mean, I'm a contemporary player. I'm a bass player. I'm a jazz player, R&B player. And that's what I've done for a living for a lot of years. But in my heart, there's a choir in my heart. And I'll listen to, I used to teach a music appreciation class for high school kids. And we would start through medieval and work all the way up to modern. And we would stop at any point along the way where the kids would generate an interest in something. And it was there that I was first exposed to the Renaissance music, because this is my first year teaching this stuff. And I brought up a Kyrie, believe it, it was kind of odd that that was the way it was. I brought up a Kyrie composed by Bach, and then a Kyrie composed by Mozart. And I played them both, and I didn't tell the students who they were. Now, they both knew about these composers. And I asked, all right, who composed what? And this one girl raised her hand, and she says, the second one was by Bach. I said, how do you know? He said, well, the first one, I'm listening to the music. I'm going, oh, my word, what a composer. That's amazing music. But when his came on, I went, what an incredible God. She says, what is it about Bach's music that draws me to God, and about Mozart's music that draws me to Mozart? I said, that's $1 million question. And that's probably the best question I've ever heard from a 15-year-old ever.
Right.
But
That's,
I was overwhelmed by the beauty of what I was hearing. And that's what I wanted to devote myself to. So I told my wife, said, look, it's too late in life for me to have a career as a composer. This is not about that. I'm done playing music. I want to do what I want to do. And for all my life, I've wanted to do what nobody else wanted to do. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're in an R&B band, dude, Mozart doesn't have a seat at the table. So
Mozart will be here today. If he used the same computer technology, what would he use this, and how would he use it for?
Oh my gosh, he would absolutely defy all the rules. He would absolutely be as bold and as brazen and as unconventional and shocking as he could possibly be, because he was a vulgar man.
Well, you know, just these perfect ear hearing and pitch and dimension and a head of orchestration and arrangement and multidimensional how music is and what it sounds already in his head before he goes to the paper. You know, that ability, and it will be kind of interesting what his production will be in today's language, right?
Oh, I bet he would have written dozens and dozens and dozens of symphonies, because you can do it so quickly now.
He could be a film composer.
I think that's where our Mozarts and Beethovens are today.
Yeah.
Because what you guys are, I do want to talk about this a bit, because film composers, to me, that's where I believe that's where our Mozarts and Handels, and I think that's where, because that's about the only venue left where you are free to totally express what's going on musically with your life or with the life of the film or anything like that. And it's the only venue that pushes you into different things.
Right.
I've written music for one short film, so I'm a film composer.
Okay. You don't know
one short film, 15 minutes. There's my 15 minutes of fame.
There you go.
But what I learned in that little process, and I know nothing about it. I like to write music. But what I learned in that was that I learned to pay really close attention to emotional content, and then go into my bucket of tools and pull out the things that would communicate that content. If it's sadness, if it's mystery, if it's, you know, I'd come up with all these little just lists of the emotions that are in the scene. And then I'd have to come up with music that would portray that and not get in the way.
Right.
Because it's not about me.
This is something about film music that I tell the students, which is something that I apply as well too, because there's something spiritual in that moment where film music actually serves the picture. And so this is great for Christian, because you have to swallow your ego and let the director know that you're serving the picture, not to glorify your music or yourself. So it's very much servanthood type of work, very complex, embodies so many different aspects of orchestrator, arranger, audio producer. So you have so many different degrees. It could be conductor as well. And so psychologists know how to do a contract. So many different aspects in one. Plus, you have to adopt yourself to the servant attitude when you're dealing as a composer, because you serve the picture, you're not serving
Yes.
yourself. You're not writing the absolute versus functional. And it's a different music for writing the purpose of just writing music for the purpose of itself, the
Right.
enjoying like the concert music that everybody goes and listen to it. That's the absolute music, and functional music is the music that is attached to a movie, that has a certain role and function in there. And so, but in a general, the film music can very much be very spiritual, depending how someone gets into it as it's seen. Now, you could be moral, good inclined person, but you have to have a good serving heart in order to be successful in
Right.
it. So right away, Bible is, predominantly so right in the hands. If you know how to be a good servant, you could
Yes.
actually serve. I always tell the story to the students. You have one city, you have 20 donut store. Why do I choose to go to that specific door? And why would I go in this store? And the same thing, our clients, they choose that. It's a buyer's market. You go to the store because you like to be treated that way. So the same way, if I want to be treated that way, my attitude changes, and all the different concept changes, how I basically come across, because I want to be treated the same way. And in end effect, and ends up of returning customers and clients.
Well,
Right.
it's
So
interesting. I had a conversation with a musician the other day, and we were talking about the function of, I'm a bass player primarily, of the bass
right,
player in an ensemble, a group.
right,
And he said that you cannot think like a bass player when you're in a band. I said, what? I am a bass player. He said, no, 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 no. Think like you're a producer. He says, don't ask yourself, what can I do on the bass? Ask, what can I do to help the drummer do his job? What can I do to support the singer to do her job? Well, and he
right,
said, and he made the same statement you did. You're a servant of the song.
right,
You're a
right.
servant of the process. And he said, if you will adopt the producer's hat, then you will play differently.
Sure.
And I would suppose if you were to go into scoring a film, if you're going to be, if this film is going to be your vehicle to fame and fortune, that's a different attitude than knowing that composing the music to make the film important,
Yeah.
not to make you important.
Sure. And with just when talking about film music can be so complex as a film itself. There's lighting, there's coloring, there's camera position, there's camera angle, there's different shots that communicates from the perspective of a director. So you become a filmmaker is not only a process, but also understanding how film works, because you could extract so many different ideas how music can find what I call, like in the audio branding, you find a gap between the director that created that product and the audience, and you're sitting in between to create the bridge, which is the emotional content creating. So the music sort of bridges invisible, creating the emotion. So in a nutshell, we creating a superficial world to make them feel certain ways, if both parties understand that on a professional level, because the audience wants to understand, wants to feel it, and wants to consume it. And my job is to kind of superficially recreate that environment.
I worked with I taught in a fine arts academy with a film producer, and she said something that was revolutionary to me. She said, every film has a God moment in it. And I said, what do you mean by that? She says, the greatest story ever told has already been written. And if you look at every great story, every great movie, it has aspects of it. Said, look at the Rocky Balboa thing, the Rocky films. You have a guy who is defeated, who shouldn't be anywhere near a championship boxing match, taking on the most powerful fighter in the world and overcoming all odds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She says, that's the story of Jesus. He was a carpenter from Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? What is this stupid little rabbi doing? Healing lepers? What? But then he's crucified. His enemies kill him. Story over, right? No. Like Rocky getting up in the 15th round to knock out Apollo Creed, Jesus climbs out of the tomb on the third day, victorious. And so she said, if you think about music and film that way, that there's, and she would so agree with what you just said about the spirituality, the spiritual nature, that there's a God story. She said, now, even in the most profane type of films, there's still a good guy, there's a bad guy. And she said, if you can find those moments, it'll help you do your job. And
So
now
on that note, I know you have a couple questions, but
Yeah.
on that note, I tell because there are so many adding to the content of college, and we finish as a composer. So therefore, there are so many composers every year walking out of the college just as a form of job. Is that the calling that we're talking about? That we in Liberty we talk about. Is this something God puts on your heart to be that one person? Are you becoming maybe a dentist? Maybe is this something that your parents wanted, or is it something that burns in your heart so much that you feel like God has called you to do that one function? Now, becoming in that one area that Christ-like, it's the same thing as being a lawyer or producer or milkman, in other words. So it's basically doing everything for the glory of Christ, right? But it's just really, is that really the best quality that I have something to share with the world as my life progresses to the end, so I don't waste my time? And part of that is college, to being good advised about, what am I learning? How am I, what's my perception? What do I really want to do? And I tell the student that everybody is unique, actually, as a composer in this life. And I think the goal is to contribute to the society, and also to make a long-lasting impact and to glorify God in life. Yes. I think that if I have this as a composer, this approach in my heart, I think that something magic's going to happen in a sense of positive. But I also say it to every musician, because you asked me about what's good for every musician. There are so many different ones. As an encouragement to that young guy that doesn't know where to go with that, believe in yourself that God gave you that unique talent. You have to work on your craft and do some work. There's no excuse for that. But sometimes people, I'm tiny, nobody listens to me, and I'm in my misery. It's just learn the craft and learn the one task that you need to learn, or two or three or four, and be good at it without basically emotionally reacting that I'm left alone. And then, it's phone's going to ring if you do a great job. And, but the good news is there's somebody in this world that's going to need your score or your music because you're writing. And that's pretty much what I gave the students as an idea, that everybody is important in this life because God put us on this earth. And that individualism, even if there's 5, 6 composers, every time by the end of semester, if I have assignments and all the composers do the same project, everybody scores different.
Yes.
So that says that, no matter how many students, and it could be the simple 6 seconds commercial, you would not believe, everybody will have a different approach every single semester. There's not even one that can copy one another. Even that's a 6 seconds Sennheiser commercial about swipe of a light. Everybody will do that different. So
I want to come and take your class.
Well, yeah, it's very intense. It's very intense, but very healthy.
It's funny that you mentioned about the calling thing. Years ago, I thought God was calling me to be a pastor or worship minister. And the doors kept closing. I went to a pastor and said, how do I know if God's really calling me to this? I'm having my doubts now. And he asked me a question which changed my life, disappointed me greatly at first. He said, can you wake up imagining yourself doing anything other than preaching or teaching or being a minister of music? I said, well, yeah. He said, you're not called. He said, when you're called to something, every waking moment revolves around that thing. And I just thought he was shining me on. I was really disappointed, a little angry. And because I really felt God was calling me. But he said, when I can't imagine not preaching, I can't imagine my life not teaching the Bible. He said, if you can imagine your life doing anything else, you need to keep looking for what God has for you. Well, that was like almost 40 years ago. And I'd say about 20 years ago, I realized what God had called me to do and be, and that's to be a teacher of young musicians. I teach middle school, high school, and that's my sweet spot. And it's like every day I wake up, I get to do something in music. I'm composing music still. Nobody's listening to it. I don't care. That's not why I do it, honestly.
I always applaud you because dealing with young musicians, specifically in a middle school or high school, I know what that means. So I could always, across the country to all the teachers that are doing that. I know what that work involves and what work is needed to be done. And so, because I'm getting from your area, from high school, I'm getting that in university level.
Yes.
But I'm greatly appreciating all the work that happens in the middle school into the high school.
I sent several of my high school students to Liberty. And the thing is, it's are you familiar with that film Chariots of Fire? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
All right. The guy was a Scottish track and field athlete on the United Kingdom Olympics team, but he and his sister were getting ready to go on a missionary trip to China, and they're raising funds, but he was in training, and she was so angry with him. She says, "I don't understand your fascination with running. Why do you have to run?" His answer changed my life. He said, "God made me to run fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure." That was it. He wasn't running for glory. He wasn't running for a medal or money. God made him to run, and so he ran. Right. And so somebody asked me, why do you at 58, why do you go get a master's degree in composition? I said, because I can't imagine a day going by without writing something in music. I just can't. Right. Whether or not anything comes of it. Eric Liddell did no more in track. After that Olympic experience was over, he went to India and he died there as a missionary.
Hans Zimmer had 2 weeks. Hans Zimmer had 2 weeks on the piano lessons for 2 weeks, and then he decided. He said either him or me, right? And so this is it about my piano lessons. 2 weeks.
Wow.
That's what he probably explains and shares with the world. Well, I know Hans. I met him in LA a couple of years ago. Oh, way back in 2007.
He's amazing. Oh my gosh. It's funny. I saw a round table with all the great composers, Hans Zimmer and all those folks. And the guy that was conducting the round table discussion, he put a question out there, says, "What is your greatest fear?" And Hans Zimmer said something to the effect, says, "I really hope I don't screw this film up." And the guy was stunned. He says, "You're Hans, oh my God, Zimmer." Okay. Why would you think? He says, "Because you're only as good as your next film. The last film, okay. But now you have to do it all over again. You have to prove yourself all over again." And was he the guy that worked with, a very famous movie producer. But anyway, he said Steven Spielberg. Was he the one that worked with Spielberg? I can't remember. Or is that?
I think he was Black Hawk Down. He was working on the film. Maybe Bruckheimer. I'll have to look for the producers.
But Steven Spielberg was coming over to one of the other composers, might not have been Hans Zimmer. And he says, "Oh, I'll tell you what my greatest fear is, having Steven Spielberg come by and look over your shoulder while you're sitting at the piano, outlining your ideas for a film." And again, the guy asked me, says, "You guys are the greatest there are in the business right now. Why are you afraid?" He said, maybe that's what makes us great. We live afraid. And so we work. And so I just thought that was amazing. All right. I have a question for your bride.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Mary Alice, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I've read your book. Both your guys' story, it just makes me want to cry, period. Just makes you want to cry. But then there's happy tears at the end because there's a happy ending. Right. But how hard was it to make that decision that you had to leave and become a single woman before meeting your husband? How hard was that?
Really good question. Well, without giving away too much, it was completely crushing morally. Mm-hmm. It crushed me because I never saw myself in a separation, a divorce, in my life. I wanted to marry one man and be with one man my whole life. So, I mean, the act of leaving was instinctive a little bit, because I just knew if I didn't leave, bad things were coming.
Right.
And I don't even know how I got the courage to leave. I mean, I packed secretly my bags
Mm-hmm.
and left. Yeah, I just knew I needed to go.
Now, isn't it amazing in retrospect, looking back then from where you are now, to see, because I'm reading your story, I'm seeing God's hand in all of it. And I told a student once that we're creatures of time. You know, we live moment to moment to moment. God is outside of time. He's eternal. So our story, I'm looking around for something here real quick, see if I can have it close by. Nah, of course I don't. Our story is like a book. All right, say this is a book. This is Paige's story. This is Mary Alice's story. And God he knows the end of the story at the same time that he knows the beginning, and at the same time that he knows the middle, right? But Mary Alice has to walk through this story a page at a time. Mary Alice doesn't know what chapter 12 holds. God does.
Yeah.
And God, this God that you're depending on, he's the one who says, I know the plans I have for you. They're good, not evil. And but you're in chapter 2, you're going, I'm not sure I agree with that assessment at the moment, God. But then you haven't been to chapter 12 yet or whatever. Yeah. And so I'm reading your story and I'm thinking, and I knew the end of the story. Of course, you're married to this guy. I knew the end of the story while I'm reading that part of the story. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like, I want to shout at the pages. Don't worry, kid. It's okay. It works out. Yeah, I know it's terrible right now. And I'm just amazed at how God does stuff and what he did through you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe it was God. I mean, at the point, that it got physically abusive, I felt like that was God getting me out. Like it was just enough for me to leave, because I don't know if I would have left otherwise.
Right.
Because I was really against the idea of separation, of divorce, of any of that. So I saw it as that was God getting me out. And there's so much even more to the story that is not told, of just how he rescued me even through that time, just the timing of things. I don't know if you want to hear about that, but I have some really God stories.
But see, isn't that the glory of it all? God, we call them God sightings in my house. I apologize. There was a video glitch while I was editing this, and we missed a little piece of the video here. Basically, I'm sharing with Chris and his wife how my wife, Glenda, had lost her father at a very, very young age. And we were talking about how the experiences that Chris's wife experienced prepared her for ministry to other people in the future. As horrific as what her life had to go through at that point, it was preparation for something coming. And I'm in the context of that, I'm sharing my wife's experience. Now we can return to the part of the video that is still good. One day she's also a teacher. She was teaching a kindergarten class. And this little child had just lost her father in a horrific car accident. And she was quiet and withdrawn and wasn't responding. And Glenda, who's everybody's grandma, she just swooped this kid up into her lap in class one day, sat her in the lap, had everybody else read at tables doing projects. And she just told her, says, my daddy died when I was young too. And this little girl looked up at her with tears in her eyes and says, really? Really? And they just had this most wonderful conversation. And you could see this little girl freed up from the fact, and my wife came home to me today. She just came home from school that day, says, I know why. And that's all she said. I know why. Because you can comfort others with the comfort that you have been given.
Yeah. And
So,
you can relate to people in a way, you can have compassion and empathy in a way that I could, in a way that I never could have if I didn't go through that.
and God is going to put you into the life of somebody that desperately needs someone like you, because we all have great advice to give, but only the people who have walked where other people have walked are really qualified to help in those situations. Like, I understand, I didn't come from an abusive household. I understand it, but I didn't walk through it. So I'm really not in a place to offer advice or anything like that other than comfort. But so anyway, I just really felt the need. I need to tell you that God has done an incredible work in you. And even that ugly stuff in the past is going to prepare you for something really beautiful in the future. Part of which you're walking right now, I might add.
Already seen that. Yeah. I mean, I have this journal that where I journaled a lot through from 2009 on, when I was really starting to work on myself and my relationship with my dad. And I pulled it out the other day because we were moving all my stuff right into his house. And I looked at the last page of that journal. It just happened to finish after everything. And the last sentence in that journal was my prayer was that, God, I pray that you will allow me to use everything I've gone through and to be able to share my story with other people. And I was like, babe, this is like, that was my prayer. And here's our story.
Yep. Oh. So
we also
anyway,
put the
thank you for that.
Yeah.
What?
We also put the tagline on the book, and that has God tested your faith yet?
Yeah.
Just be very, very, it's like, hopefully, we'll hold you in your thought for a second. Whatever is going on in your life, maybe God is preparing a test for you. If you feel like, you just passed all the tests, it's like, think about Job, how many tests he had to endure. And would I really pass all my tests? I mean, we have in a high school test, we have elementary school test, we have high school, college test, life test, and this test and that. So tests is all about the life. And by the end, before we go from this life to the other side, it's also going to be test of what we did in our life. So there's so much depth in that one word, test. Right?
Oh my gosh, yes. And it's funny. When I was in the Navy in Charleston, South Carolina, when Hurricane Hugo came through. Now, Hurricane Hugo had been a Type 1 hurricane, Class 1 hurricane, and so we decided we're going to stay in our house. Well, it sucked in a tropical depression and went to Category 3, like that. That's a huge storm. And as I was just approaching Charleston, I called my brother up, who's in Seattle. Said, "Get on the Weather Channel. Power just went out. Tell me what you see." He said, "I want you to go outside your house and see if there's a big red dot on it." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because, dude, that thing's coming right up your front porch." I went, So we're in there, and this huge storm. It was the most horrific display of nature's terror that I've ever experienced. We made it through the first part and through the eye, the back wall, and the winds had died down to 90 miles an hour. If you can imagine that, died down to 90 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, I heard a freight train. There's no freight train lines by my house. And in the South, they'd always told you when a tornado's coming, it sounds like a freight train. And I immediately got all our family in the middle of we put a mattress over us, and we could hear the back window of the house, which is cracked a little bit, going up and down like a window shade, like that. And I could hear the sound of ripping paper, which is our roof being torn away. And then we could feel all the air being sucked out of the house. And and my 8-year-old son just said, "Daddy, make it stop. Make it stop." I've never been more helpless in all my life. I remember my prayer was, "Dear God, your word says in Ephesians 2:8-9, like you have to quote the Bible to God, right? Like he doesn't know, right? And I said, "God, your word says in Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace are we saved through faith. Now would be good." That was my prayer. And after it's all said and done, of course, we survived because I'm here talking to you. I remember thinking to myself, that was a dumb prayer. My wife says, "No, I think it worked." And we went outside and we saw where the funnel had lifted up about 50 yards in front of our house, traveled 6 feet over the peak of our house, drop down 50 yards on the other side, and continue on his destructive journey. And I remember running back to the Bible going, yeah, but why did I pray that prayer? The word saved just means saved. What do you need saving from? Well, at that precise moment in time, it was a tornado. And God saved us from the tornado. And, it's just like, that was, to me, you don't know what you're made of until you're thrown into a situation where there's no hope. That's when you find out what's inside here.
Right.
And so, Mary Alice, when you were thrown in that situation with the really rotten situation you were living in, there had to have been times when there was no hope. But look what God did.
Yeah.
Look where you are.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, coming together with Chris, first of all, it blows my mind. And I cried every day in gratitude because I can't believe where my life is going. I can't believe where I am now. I can't believe what's happening. But as you were saying, being in that moment of hopelessness, I was sharing with people at different times that, how the Bible says that your, faith is tested and all of that. Well, it's because when those bad things are happening, right, or you're in that situation, you have to decide, do I still believe that God is good? And do I really still believe his promises? And that's when your faith has to do something.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, that's where you find out what your faith is founded on. If your faith is founded on a sovereign God who is Lord of all, then you can trust his heart, even if you don't understand his methodology. He has a plan for you, and his plan for you is to prepare you to be Chris's wife. I remember when I was in school with you, Chris, your first wife was battling cancer, correct? Was that during that time frame?
Yep.
And I knew a little bit about it. You told me a little bit about it. And I remember thinking to myself that I couldn't fathom. I've been married it'll be 47 years this June. And I can't imagine that process. And going through that, burying your wife and that grieving process, and knowing that you were now looking back at that time at VCFA, when my snoring kept you awake, apparently. I still think that's not true. But going through that at VCFA, I'm thinking to myself, I remember I look back at my memories at you now, and I'm going, how could that guy pull that off? Because you were writing great music. You were a positive witness for Christ. And I just remember thinking, how can he? Because I didn't know all of that then, but now knowing what I know after reading your book, I'm looking back at that time going, how in the world could that guy walk through that? Because I can't imagine myself having to deal with losing Glenda. And then losing your wife like that, and then you find this blushing bride next to you. Dude, is God good or what?
No comments, of course.
But so anyway, this book is it was an easy read, couple 3 hours. And it really left me wanting a little bit more. No, I don't know if and it's not, I want more like a guy who's driving by a car wreck and wants to see more of the accident. No, that's not important. But there's enough of that information there. But I'm hoping you guys append this book or do another one about your life together since then.
We're planning, but of course, this is something, like you said, it's a faster read. So, I remember reading books that have maybe 250 pages, and it's a long read, specifically when you deal with whatever is happening in somebody's life. Not to diminish that, whatever is happening medically. But, as you probably remember, my childhood wasn't as easy as everybody else's thing, right?
I was stunned when I read that part of your story. Wow.
Right.
Having to escape to West Berlin as a teenager?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, if you saw the movie Shining, all the different relationship that I had with my dad, it was just twice as strong as was in the movie.
Wow.
and and then I think what God has just kept me, it's just taught me how to persevere. And I would like, as a kid, you're preparing the core, the quality of the character for later on to serve my first wife in that time.
Mm-hmm.
Being ready to being equipped for something that required so much patience and perseverance, not to giving up where nobody, in the world of cancer, the marriage is a split in a second because the
Yeah.
guy walks off or the woman just doesn't want to deal with that. I never could understand that if people loving one another and when they promise at the altar, basically saying death will, bring us apart only, but we in all sickness and well and all the different promises, all the
Mm-hmm.
different laws that we exchange, and then kids are in there and they're just walking up and then finding another spouse on top of that. That's for me the gruesomest moment ever, just from understanding what that could mean for itself. But it's just that
Yeah.
escape that some people don't want to deal with, and I understand that side. But it creates such a abandonment to loved ones that is
Yes.
probably hard to even describe or even take it, where the other group of people being left alone. I don't even know how God feels at the end, because God feels for every human being. Because, like you said, God sees every human and is all with everybody's step of the way. We're never going to understand how God works and operates, but just thinking that He feels for us individually, and for those people who are a widow or who are alone mothers, and there are so many of those, right? By abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just whatever we during our even interview, what happens right now, it's beyond our imagination. How much abuse
Yes.
on a daily basis. So, and it's going to be as long as Jesus Christ come back. And
It's funny. The thought that was going through my brain while you were talking there a second ago, and you have to forgive me. I interrupt so much.
oh no, no,
It's
you're fine, you're fine, you're
Your
fine.
I
show.
think it. I think it's my superpower. But no, the thought that was going through my mind was what Paul had to say about what love means
Right,
in 1 Corinthians. You had 1 Corinthians 12, spiritual gifts, 1 Corinthians 13. We'll come back to that in a second. And then 14, more spiritual gifts. But in 13, he talks about love, and he's chewing out. People don't realize he's actually chewing out the Corinthian church in chapter 13, because he says, you guys, he says, you're eagerly desiring all these showy gifts, the prophecy, the tongues, the healings, yada, 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 yada. He said, but I'm going to show you the best way. Love is patient. Love
right,
is
right,
kind. Love puts, basically, his definition of love, if I understand it correctly, it was a new aspect of that word that hadn't been introduced into classical literature, the agape.
right,
And it's putting the other person first.
right, right.
I
That's
if I truly love my brother, his needs are more important than mine.
right, right,
And if I truly love my wife, her needs are more important than mine. And when you have a husband and wife who both understand that,
right.
that's a slice of heaven on earth.
Right. That's where you're being, that's exactly what God, blessed us both with, finding one another. And that's, I couldn't find anyone else's as my bride that wouldn't have the strong belief and become a woman of God that Mary Alice is.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all both as individuals still strive to learn from God on our individual basis, but that feeds us, makes us only stronger, because it's not focusing on one another, just focusing on God individually, because we
Yes.
know we serve God and we're going to be everybody individually. We're going to stand in front of Him telling what we did with our life. But also I understand that I have a responsibility for my wife to the end of this life and beyond. And so
Yes.
I'm going to be accountable for my doings,
Yep. Well, Paul says in Ephesians, I think, husbands, you're supposed to love your wives like Christ loves the church.
Correct.
Right. And that's a pretty heavy duty assignment.
Oh yeah. It is.
And I'm just So I know I kind of wanted to talk to you about music, but I kind of like the way this conversation
Well,
has
we
gone.
could talk about anything, but Mary Alice.
Well, I was going to say it gives me so much security to know that Chris feels accountable to God for our relationship. So even though we're not perfect, right? We still have
No, wait. Of
challenges
course you are.
but the challenges are for good, right?
Yes.
Like does us. So it's all good. But that foundation always, it makes me so secure.
Well, I am just so appreciative, Chris, that I got to meet you at VCFA. And when you went to Liberty, now I can start telling my students who are going to go to Liberty. I know a guy in Liberty in the music department. I know a guy. I know a guy.
And it's almost 7 years for me that I teach at
Wow.
Liberty. Yeah, believe it or
My
not.
goodness.
And
So now,
did it go from LA to Virginia?
Right. Because I moved from
but LA, Colorado,
right.
several times. I mean, you were,
Right.
and then Virginia. Holy mackerel.
Why?
So now,
Nobody even knew that I was flying 6 years, fly back from Denver to LA every week.
wow. And now, when you were in LA, what kind were you scoring? Of course, you were scoring films there.
I was working at Sound City. Now it's the Hall of Fame Studios.
Okay, so were you an employee of them, or did you rent space,
No,
or
I
a
was
contractor?
No. I just find my studio there. I set it
Okay,
up. Yeah, there's a lot of Dr. Dre and different producers for them, making a bunch of beats, and there was just mastering studios, and there were Bruckheimer shows, TV Foley stages, and sound stage. There's a bunch of 100 people were working in a facility.
wow, that had to have been an exciting time.
Yeah, this is where Pat Benatar, Nirvana, Nevermind record was done. Foo Fighters, Elton John recorded, Fleetwood Mac. Oh my goodness, even Beatles came in the early days. This was before even I was born, testing that amplifiers, the Vox amplifiers in that facility in the old days. So through that, of course, there is Sound City, the documentary made on. It's still playing out for free, but what I've got to recommend to watching the language because we dealing with rock and roll in here, right?
Yeah, exactly. So was that where you were working when I met you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I'm as our time comes to a close, I'm grateful that I know you, and I'm grateful who you are in Christ. And I'm really happy you found this lady sitting next to you. And I think you and her together make an incredible team. And just as a visible representation of the grace of God.
Well,
because both of you came through things that should have crushed you. And yet here you are, all dressed up spiffy and nice and smiling for Jesus.
Well, hallelujah to that. Well, I'm so glad, we're so thankful that make this, that this book brings hope to people that go through that directly, or they dealing with any of areas, because we covering pretty much so many areas that a lot of young and old go through it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I feel like I finally met you and your wife for the first time. I know more stuff about you now. I want to do this again sometime where you and I can talk shop about music, because I have some questions about music.
Sounds fantastic.
And I'm going to put my music theory nerd hat on, and you and I will just dance the dance of music nerds.
Sounds like fun.
It would be a lot of fun. But I've got to go. You got to go. God bless you guys. Thank you so much. Oh, absolutely. God bless you guys. See you later.
See you. Bye.
Wow. What an incredible conversation with my old friend, Chris, and his new wife, Mary Alice. Initially, my plan was to talk more about his career as a film composer and as a teacher of film composition at Liberty University. But you know what? We'll come back to that later in another podcast episode. This was important, and I could not be happier for my friend with the way God has dealt with him in his life. And I'm so grateful that God brought Mary Alice to him. This was a great interview. So until next time, this is Paige, and I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.